Chosen one, there are moments when heaven pulls back the veil just enough for you to understand why certain people entered your life. What once seemed like coincidence now reveals itself as divine instruction. God never wastes an encounter, a delay, or even a painful relationship. Every person who crossed your path carried a purpose, whether to strengthen you, refine you, or reveal something hidden within your spirit. Today, God is opening your eyes to recognize one particular type of person whose influence has shaped more of your journey than you realized. What you are about to understand will change how you respond forever. Chosen one, God is revealing how to deal with the person in your life because too much time has been lost trying to understand someone who was never assigned to think like you. You have prayed for clarity. You have asked why every conversation seems to end in confusion, why every act of kindness is somehow twisted into suspicion, and why peace disappears the moment this person enters your space. The answer is not that you have failed. The answer is that God is teaching you discernment instead of dependence. The person is not defined by a single letter alone. It represents a spirit of disruption, a pattern of behavior, and a lesson disguised as a relationship. God is less interested in exposing their identity than He is in revealing your response. Many chosen people become trapped because they spend all their energy trying to change someone whom God never instructed them to fix. The mission was never to repair every broken soul you encountered. Sometimes your assignment was simply to recognize the pattern, protect your peace, and continue walking where God called you. For too long you believed that patience meant unlimited tolerance. You convinced yourself that love required endless sacrifice, even when your spirit was becoming exhausted. But God is reminding you that wisdom and love walk together. True love does not abandon wisdom. Compassion does not require self-destruction. Mercy does not demand that you remain in environments where your calling is constantly under attack. The person often enters quietly. They rarely announce themselves with obvious hostility. Instead, they appear supportive at first. They know the right words. They celebrate your victories just enough to remain close. They ask questions that seem innocent, yet somehow every answer you give becomes information used against you later. They observe more than they participate. They study your strengths because they are searching for your weaknesses. God wants you to understand that not everyone who applauds you is assigned to accompany you. Some people clap simply to stay close enough to influence your next decision. Their presence feels familiar, but familiarity should never be confused with divine alignment. Just because someone has been around you for years does not mean they are meant to remain beside you forever. Chosen one, one of the hardest lessons you will ever learn is that spiritual maturity sometimes requires emotional distance. This is difficult because your heart naturally seeks reconciliation. You believe every disagreement can be healed, every misunderstanding can be explained, and every wound can eventually close. While forgiveness is always possible, restored access is not always God's plan. There is a difference between releasing bitterness and reopening doors that heaven has already closed. The person has a remarkable ability to make you question yourself. After every interaction, you replay your words. You wonder if you spoke too firmly or too softly. You ask yourself whether you misunderstood their intentions. This constant self-doubt is not accidental. Confusion is often the atmosphere where manipulation grows strongest. God is not the author of confusion. When your discernment repeatedly senses unrest around someone, do not silence that inner warning simply because you fear appearing unkind. Remember how often you ignored what your spirit noticed first. Before the betrayal, there was discomfort. Before the disappointment, there was hesitation. Before the broken trust, there was a quiet whisper urging you to slow down. But because you wanted to believe the best, you dismissed the warning. God is not condemning you for that. He is training you so that next time you recognize His voice sooner than your emotions. Many chosen ones struggle because they mistake repeated opportunities for repeated assignments. Just because someone returns does not mean God sent them back. Not every reunion is restoration. Some reunions are examinations. Heaven allows certain people to reappear simply to reveal whether you have truly learned the lesson that once caused you pain. The person often depends on your compassion more than your companionship. They know you dislike conflict. They know you prefer harmony over confrontation. Because of this, they assume your silence is permission. They expect you to continue carrying emotional burdens that were never yours. Yet God is teaching you that healthy boundaries are not walls of hatred. They are gates of wisdom. A gate opens for the right people and remains closed to those who repeatedly dishonor what God entrusted to your care. There comes a moment when protecting your peace becomes an act of obedience. That statement may challenge everything you have believed, but listen carefully. God never asked you to sacrifice the health of your soul to maintain someone else's comfort. You are not responsible for keeping everyone pleased with you. If your obedience to God disappoints someone committed to controlling you, their disappointment is not your disobedience. The person frequently creates cycles instead of progress. Every season seems to repeat the last. The same promises are made. The same apologies are spoken. The same behaviors return. You begin believing that this time will be different because the words sound sincere. But God teaches you to evaluate fruit, not merely intentions. Words may inspire hope, but consistent actions reveal truth. Chosen one, pay attention to what consistently follows this person's presence. Do you leave feeling strengthened or drained? Do you feel inspired to pursue God's purpose or distracted by endless emotional turmoil? Does your faith become clearer or clouded? These questions matter because every relationship plants something in your spirit. Some plant courage, others plant fear. Some cultivate peace, others cultivate anxiety. God wants you to recognize the harvest before you continue watering the wrong field. There is another reason God is exposing this pattern. Your future requires a level of focus that cannot coexist with constant emotional instability. Where God is taking you, every decision will carry greater influence. Every distraction will become more costly. The enemy understands that if he cannot stop your destiny directly, he will attempt to exhaust your attention indirectly. Endless drama becomes one of his favorite strategies because exhausted people rarely hear God's direction clearly. Notice how the J person often appears whenever momentum begins building in your life. Just as opportunities increase, unexpected conflicts emerge. Just as your confidence grows, discouraging words suddenly appear. Just as your vision becomes clearer, confusion seems to surround your relationships. These interruptions are not always random. Sometimes they are designed to pull your eyes away from what heaven is building and redirect your energy toward problems that never deserved so much of your attention. God is reminding you that your calling has value. Because it has value, it requires protection. You would never leave precious treasure exposed without care. Yet many chosen people leave their emotional and spiritual lives completely unguarded. They grant unrestricted access to anyone who asks, believing that availability equals holiness. But even Jesus withdrew from crowds. Even he chose moments of solitude. If the Savior understood the necessity of protecting his focus, why should you feel guilty for doing the same? The J person may accuse you of changing. In truth, you have changed, you have grown, you have matured. You have become less willing to entertain conversations that produce nothing but confusion. You have become slower to react, quicker to pray, and more committed to peace than proving yourself right. Growth often appears offensive to those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Do not be surprised if this person begins rewriting history. Suddenly, your kindness is forgotten, your sacrifices are minimized, your loyalty is questioned. This is another reason God tells you not to build your identity upon human approval. People's opinions can change with circumstances, but God's purpose over your life remains steady even when others refuse to acknowledge it. Chosen one, the greatest victory over the J person is not found in defeating them through arguments or exposing them before others. The greatest victory begins when their behavior no longer controls your emotional climate. When you stop reacting to every provocation, you reclaim strength that has belonged to you all along. When you refuse to carry offenses that were never yours, your spirit becomes light enough to hear God's voice with greater clarity. That is where true freedom begins, and that is where heaven starts preparing you for the next revelation. Chosen one, once God opens your eyes to these patterns, you can never return to living as though you do not see them. Awareness brings responsibility. Discernment is not given so you can judge people harshly. It is given so you can guard what heaven has entrusted to you. The moment you begin honoring what God has shown you, your decisions start changing. You stop chasing explanations that never come. You stop waiting for apologies that may never be spoken. You stop investing your peace in people who have repeatedly demonstrated that they cannot value it. The J person often depends on one thing above all else: your willingness to ignore your own convictions. They know that if they can keep you questioning yourself, they can keep you from walking boldly in your purpose. Every time you begin standing with confidence, they introduce uncertainty. Every time you begin trusting God's direction, they offer an alternative filled with fear, doubt, or unnecessary criticism. It is subtle enough to appear like concern, yet consistent enough to become a pattern. God is saying that not every voice deserves equal weight in your life. Some voices encourage your faith, others slowly erode it. Some remind you of God's promises, others repeatedly remind you of your past mistakes. Pay attention to which voice leaves the strongest imprint on your heart. Whatever you continually listen to eventually shapes the way you think, and the way you think determines the direction you walk. Have you noticed how the J person rarely celebrates your growth without attaching a condition? They might congratulate you, but immediately mention why your success probably will not last. They may acknowledge your progress, yet quickly remind you of a failure from years ago. Instead of allowing your victories to breathe, they wrap them in doubt. This is why you often leave conversations with them feeling smaller than when you arrived. God never intended for encouragement to become something you had to earn through constant performance. Your identity was established long before human opinions entered the picture. The opinions of others may fluctuate, but the calling God placed upon your life remains untouched by their approval or disapproval. When you finally understand this, You stop measuring your worth by how one difficult person responds to your obedience. The enemy understands that confidence rooted in God is difficult to shake. That is why he often uses repeated discouragement instead of dramatic attacks. A single harsh word may not affect you, but years of subtle criticism can begin to sound like truth if you are not careful. This is why Scripture continually emphasizes renewing your mind. God knows that battles are often won or lost long before they become visible. The person may not openly oppose your dreams. Instead, they question the timing. They question your ability. They question whether you are truly ready. They question whether you misunderstood what God spoke to you. At first, these questions seem reasonable. But after enough repetition, they become chains around your confidence. Chosen one, there is a difference between wise counsel and constant doubt. Wise counsel points you toward greater wisdom while still encouraging your faith. Constant doubt leaves you paralyzed, unable to move because every step suddenly feels dangerous. God is not leading you into paralysis. He leads with peace. Even when the path requires courage, there will come a day when the person realizes they can no longer influence your emotions the way they once did. This often surprises them. They are accustomed to seeing you defend yourself, explain yourself, or seek their understanding. When those reactions disappear, they may increase their efforts. Do not mistake increased resistance for a sign that you are making the wrong decision. Sometimes resistance increases precisely because you are finally making the right one. God is strengthening your silence. There is power in refusing to participate in conversations designed only to provoke conflict. Every invitation to argue is not an assignment from heaven. Every accusation does not require your defense. Every misunderstanding does not demand correction. Sometimes your greatest testimony is your refusal to be drawn into battles that distract from your purpose. The person often expects immediate reactions. They know that emotional responses usually create opportunities for further conflict. But when you begin responding through prayer instead of impulse, something changes. Their usual strategies lose effectiveness because they depended upon a version of you that no longer exists. God has been quietly transforming your character in ways you may not have fully noticed. Months ago, certain words would have devastated you. Certain behaviors would have ruined your entire day. Certain disappointments would have caused you to question everything. Now, while those situations still hurt, they no longer control your direction. That is growth. It may not always feel dramatic, but heaven celebrates these victories because they reveal spiritual maturity. The person cannot understand peace that is rooted in God because they have become accustomed to control through instability. They expect every disagreement to become a crisis. They expect every difference of opinion to become a personal attack. They expect every boundary to become an argument. When you calmly maintain your convictions without hostility, you introduce them to something they cannot manipulate. Chosen one, never confuse calmness with weakness. The strongest people are often those who no longer feel the need to prove their strength. They know who they are because God has settled the question within them. Confidence rooted in God does not need constant validation from people. God is also revealing that the person may unintentionally expose areas where you still need healing. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it explains why certain interactions affect you more deeply than others. Every painful reaction points towards something God desires to restore within you. Rather than merely asking God to remove difficult people, ask Him to reveal why certain words continue to wound you. Healing transforms future encounters. The remarkable thing about healing is that it changes what has access to your emotions. The same criticism that once shattered your confidence eventually becomes background noise because your identity is no longer built upon fragile foundations. The same manipulation that once trapped you loses its influence because you finally recognize it before it reaches your heart. God is saying that your peace is becoming more valuable than your need to be understood. This is one of the greatest shifts in the life of a chosen person. There comes a season when you realize that explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you only drains the strength needed for your assignment. The person may continue telling their version of your story. They may misunderstand your motives. They may even convince others to question your character. But remember this: God has never depended upon public opinion to fulfill His promises. Throughout history, many of those called by God experienced misunderstanding before they experienced recognition. If your confidence depends upon everyone agreeing with your decisions, you will never fully obey God. There will always be someone who believes you should have chosen differently. There will always be someone who criticizes what they were never called to carry. Your responsibility is not universal approval. Your responsibility is faithful obedience. Chosen one, every season teaches a different lesson. Some seasons teach perseverance. Others teach humility. This season is teaching discernment. Discernment is more than identifying danger. It is recognizing where your energy belongs. Every hour spent trying to convince the wrong person is an hour unavailable for the work God actually assigned you. Notice how often the person creates urgency around matters that have little eternal significance. Everything becomes an emergency. Every disagreement must be settled immediately. Every emotion demands your instant attention. But God's pace is different. He is never rushed by confusion. He never abandons wisdom because someone else insists upon haste. As you continue growing, you will discover the power of holy restraint. Holy restraint means you possess the ability to respond yet choose wisdom instead. It means you have every opportunity to retaliate but refuse because your character has become more important than temporary satisfaction. Anyone can react. It takes spiritual maturity to remain anchored while storms rage around you. The J person may never acknowledge the pain they caused. That possibility is difficult to accept because justice feels incomplete without recognition. Yet God reminds you that healing is not dependent upon another person's awareness. Waiting for someone else's admission before allowing yourself to move forward only extends the influence they already had over your life. Forgiveness is not pretending the wound never happened. Forgiveness is refusing to let yesterday's injury determine tomorrow's direction. You can remember the lesson without reliving the pain. You can gain wisdom without carrying bitterness. This is the freedom God desires for every chosen one. The J person often returns during seasons of transition. When God begins opening new doors, familiar distractions frequently reappear. Old conversations suddenly restart. Past relationships unexpectedly reach out. Previous conflicts demand attention again. Not every interruption is meant to be entertained. Some exist only to test whether your priorities have truly changed. God is asking you to become comfortable with disappointing people who expected unlimited access to your life. That sentence may challenge your heart because you naturally want everyone to feel accepted. Yet unlimited access is a privilege, not a right. Trust is built through consistency, honor, and mutual respect. Where those qualities are absent, boundaries become an expression of wisdom rather than rejection. Chosen one, there is something else heaven wants you to understand. The J person is not your greatest enemy. Fear is. Self-doubt is. Delayed obedience is. Those invisible battles have stolen far more opportunities than any difficult individual ever could. Once you overcome those inner obstacles, external opposition loses much of its power. God has been preparing you quietly. While you thought nothing significant was happening, He was strengthening your discernment, increasing your patience, refining your character, and teaching you to recognize His voice above every competing influence. None of that preparation was wasted. Every difficult encounter became another opportunity to practice wisdom. One day you will look back and realize that the J person unknowingly pushed you closer to God. Every disappointment drove you toward prayer. Every misunderstanding taught you greater dependence upon divine guidance. Every painful interaction forced you to seek wisdom that comfort alone could never produce. What was intended to discourage you ultimately strengthened your foundation. That does not mean the experience was easy. It means God refused to allow suffering to become meaningless. Heaven has a remarkable way of transforming painful seasons into powerful preparation. The scars remain as reminders not of defeat, but of faithfulness. They testify that God sustained you through circumstances that once seemed impossible to survive. The J person may continue living according to the same patterns, but you are no longer required to participate in them. Freedom begins the moment you realize that someone else's choices do not have to become your emotional prison. You are responsible for your response, not their behavior. God is inviting you into a higher level of peace, where your joy is no longer held hostage by another person's mood, opinion, or approval. Imagine waking each morning without carrying the weight of wondering how they will react. Imagine making decisions based upon obedience instead of fear. Imagine walking through your day with quiet confidence because you know that God Himself is directing your steps. Chosen one, this is not emotional distance born from bitterness. This is spiritual clarity born from wisdom. There is an enormous difference. Bitterness keeps people trapped in the past. Wisdom prepares them for the future. God is leading you toward the future He has prepared, and that journey requires lighter burdens, clearer vision, and unwavering trust in His voice above every other voice that seeks to compete for your attention. Chosen one, never underestimate what God can accomplish through a heart that has learned to discern without becoming bitter. The greatest evidence of spiritual growth is not that you no longer face difficult people. It is that difficult people no longer have the authority to define your peace. They may still speak, but their words no longer become your identity. They may still criticize, but their opinions no longer determine your direction. They may still misunderstand you, but you have learned that being understood by everyone is not a requirement for fulfilling the purpose God has placed upon your life. The Lord is reminding you that every season has been preparing you for this very moment. The tears you cried in private were not ignored. The prayers whispered late at night were not forgotten. The questions you carried when no one else seemed to understand were heard in heaven long before you saw the answers unfolding. God was working behind the scenes, arranging circumstances, strengthening your spirit, and teaching you lessons that could only be learned through experience. What felt like delay was often divine preparation. What felt like rejection was sometimes divine protection. What felt like confusion became the very path through which God developed your discernment. The J person may never fully understand why you have changed, but they do not need to. Your responsibility is not to convince them of your growth. Your responsibility is to remain faithful to what God has revealed. There comes a point when your actions speak more clearly than your explanations ever could. Quiet consistency will always carry greater weight than endless arguments. A life transformed by God's wisdom becomes its own testimony. Do not allow guilt to pull you back into places where God has already called you forward. The enemy often disguises guilt as compassion, hoping you will reopen doors that heaven has instructed you to leave behind. But God is calling you to walk in freedom, not in fear. Freedom does not mean you stop loving people. It means you love them without surrendering the peace, wisdom, and purpose God has entrusted to your care. As you continue your journey, remember that God is also bringing the right people into your life. Just as there are individuals who drain your strength, there are those who will encourage your faith and sharpen your wisdom and celebrate your obedience. These relationships are gifts from heaven. They remind you that not everyone is sent to hinder your progress. Some are sent to strengthen your calling, to pray with you, to stand beside you during difficult seasons, and to remind you of God's promises when your own strength begins to fade. Treasure those relationships, protect them, invest in them with gratitude, because they are evidence that God never leaves his chosen ones to walk alone. Above all, keep your eyes fixed on the one who called you. People will come and go, seasons will change, challenges will rise and fall, but God's purpose over your life remains constant. His promises do not expire because someone opposed you. His plans are not canceled because someone misunderstood you. His calling is not diminished because someone failed to recognize your value. The God who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it, and no person has the authority to overturn what heaven has already established. So walk forward with courage. Guard your heart with wisdom. Speak with grace, but never compromise truth. Forgive freely, yet exercise discernment faithfully. Release what God has told you to release, and hold tightly to what he has placed in your hands. Trust his timing, rely upon his guidance, and remember that every step taken in obedience brings you closer to the destiny he prepared long before you were born. The Lord has gone before you, he walks beside you, and he will remain faithful until every promise he has spoken over your life is fulfilled. Stand firm, chosen one, because the wisdom God has revealed today is not merely for surviving this season. It is for walking confidently into the greater purpose he has already prepared for you. May your heart remain steadfast, your spirit remain discerning, and your faith remain unshaken as you continue following the voice of God above every other voice, knowing that his direction will always lead you into peace, purpose, and victory.